Hi, everyone. I just want to share some really interesting information with you about Venus's appearance, which is her heliacal cycle. And this corresponds to the upcoming Venus star point. That is when the Sun and Venus will form their conjunction in Aries, which happens, I think, around about here. Let's see, there it is there. Okay, 23rd of March. That's Melbourne, Australia. Southern Hemisphere date and time. So it will be the 22nd for those in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, I will come back and do a complete deep dive into the Aries Venus star point. But what's equally important to understand, and this comes from, of course, Babylonian astrology, which is what I've been learning through Rumen Kolev. And once again, much appreciation to him for his wisdom. It is important to understand that not only is there a Venus star point taking place, but Venus, typically when she forms her conjunction to the Sun, she becomes invisible. And then at some point, as she moves further away from the Sun, she will reappear. I'll explain all of this in a moment. I just actually wanted to start off with saying, which I just forgot. First of all, I want to thank you all for sharing your stories on my previous upload about Saturn conjunct Venus in Pisces and how that particular conjunction, which is active right now, and we'll have one more passage in April because Venus will retrograde, is a very important culmination that I believe corresponds to the conjunction that occurred 29 years ago between Saturn and Venus in Pisces. And so my suggestion was that it wouldn't be unusual if you are experiencing reoccurring themes or seeing, lots of different dynamics or patterns or stories that began at that time resurface now. And, in some cases, that might be very, very difficult circumstances. And indeed, some people who have commented have shared, it has been, there has been some difficult situations for them that they can relate to and so forth. Anyway, if you want to know more about that, you can listen to that upload. It's just the one before this one titled Saturn conjunct Venus in Pisces. So once again, thank you all for sharing your stories. And in addition to that, I just want to also acknowledge that I appreciate that everyone seems to be going through their own personal challenges, and once again, I really feel this, this particular full moon has been really difficult. And it really just, it just reminds me, because I often have said through the years that the moon in Cancer is actually a very difficult place. Most people are under the assumption that because the moon rules Cancer and therefore it's, its most dignified position, as it were, relative to essential dignities and debilities, which is the strength of a planet and so forth. We just automatically assume, well, hey, moon in Cancer, it's fantastic. It's look, it's of course it's got really fantastic what word could I use? It's in sync, it's an energy that matches, Cancer and the moon. That energy is integral in its purest form. But in terms of how we experience this physicality and our human experience with the families we were born into and all the different karmic patterns and challenges and things that we have to work through and grow through, the moon in Cancer is actually very difficult. And this full moon really just proves that very, very strongly. Admittedly, it was a full moon squaring Chiron, conjunct Mars, Mars retrograde in fall out of bounds. I've spoken about this already. So it was inevitable that this full moon was going to trigger a lot of different things. And as I said, for me, in my family, it has triggered a lot of things. And then I mentioned the Saturn Venus conjunction, you know, don't limit Venus to just love, relationships, and money. It can be so many different things because Venus reflects anything that we love and value and connect with, anything. That's why this Saturn Venus conjunction is in Pisces is so crucial, and particularly, being at the last sign on the wheel on the zodiac. The last sign on the wheel is always about completion. There's something that needs to complete, and karma is very much associated with Saturn. So that's why I called it a cycle coming to an end with big karmic endings, because for certain individuals, there are some very big karmic endings surfacing at the moment. And I dare say they're not easy for most people. So back to the subject or topic for today. As I said, there's a Sun-Venus conjunction coming up, which will be the Aries-Venus star point. And of course, that's ruled by Mars, and Mars will still be out of bounds when this conjunction occurs. So, this Venus star point is going to be pretty tricky, but I will come back to talk about that in depth. What I really would like to bring your attention to for now, and you can note these degrees and these dates. So, when Venus forms a conjunction to the Sun, she typically becomes invisible. And in Melbourne, Australia, so I'll start with Melbourne, Australia, and then I'll go to New York, Northern Hemisphere. And this will be applicable to a lot of places in the Northern Hemisphere. Not every place, because Venus's appearance and disappearance is purely based on latitude, which means one's location. And so her appearance is she's not seen everywhere at the same time. It changes based on latitude. So this is a general kind of outline, if you like. But I have looked at a fair few places in the USA, and there's a fair few places in the USA, starting from New York to LA to all those places. Venus is visible. Okay. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me just start with the Southern Hemisphere Melbourne chart. So this is the chart that I've got on the screen at the moment is for the 1st of March, 2025. And you can see that there is, well, actually, I better grab an arrow just to point to things, because this chart can be a bit tricky if you're not familiar with it. So that's not the one I want. Just bear with me. Okay, so there's Venus right there, and she's highlighted in blue. And because she's highlighted in the color blue, we know that she's still visible. This is how to recognize this in this program. For instance, if you look just here, that's Mercury, and see how it's faded out in gray and it's got a cross there. That's telling us that Mercury is invisible. Okay, but leave Mercury out of it. I just wanted to show you the difference. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll animate the chart, but I've got to close that window. I just want to show you when Venus becomes invisible. Okay, so we'll just go one day at a time. And I'm going to fast forward because I know when it happens. It's basically on the 11th of March in Melbourne, Australia. Now I've got it to the 9th of March. There's the 10th. There's the 11th. Now, can you see Venus is invisible there? She's highlighted in grey. And it says up there EL1, which is the evening last. Never mind about those details. That can get a little bit tricky. All I want to share with you today really is when Venus disappears and when she reappears, and where that occurs in the Babylonian zodiac and in the tropical zodiac. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. But I did just want to show you graphically how this appears in the chart. So if I'm to continue to animate, I'll just keep going. I'll bump it up a bit quicker. So we're at the 19th of March now. As you can see, she's still invisible. There she is there. Okay. Now here she's forming her conjunction to the sun and she's invisible. Okay. And so she's been invisible since the 11th of March, Southern Hemisphere, Melbourne. Okay. She forms her conjunction to the sun 22nd, 23rd of March, and she's still invisible. Okay. And I'm just going to fast forward to show you when she reappears, which is just there. So let me just go one day back. So 27th of March, see she's shaded in grey. She's still invisible. So 28th of March, that's her becoming visible as a morning star in the Southern Hemisphere. Okay, that's her first appearance. And basically, just written it down. So she disappears on the 11th of March and she reappears on the 28th of March. That's in Southern Hemisphere, Melbourne. It's very important to understand because when Venus disappears, it means all Venusian things are basically hidden, if you like. Venus has gone into another dimension. She's actually gone into the underworld. So Venusian matters during that time from the 11th to the 28th, that is not an optimal time, an ideal time to be doing anything Venusian from, particularly from that external material plane. This is Venus's descent into the underworld, and she's got to go through this whole purification process. If you know anything about the descent of Inanna, that's what this is about. And this descent is from Venus being an evening star, okay, going into the underworld, disappearing from the 11th of March to the 28th of March, where she will be reborn as the morning star. So for the last 8, 9 months, she's been an evening star. And that equates to the goddess of love, Aphrodite. The evening star is a much softer Venus, and it is very much connected to spiritual, celestial, mystical, romance, love. All those sorts of things are accentuated when Venus is an evening star. And right now, what's happening? Well, in March, she will leave the world, as it were, because she disappears out of the sky. So it's literal, it's happening on an astronomical level. And then there's a symbolic and astrological interpretation to that, which is the descent of Inanna, going through the seven gates, okay, ultimately being killed and then being reborn. There's a whole story there between her and her sister, Ereshkigal. She actually is Ereshkigal anyway. It's very complicated, but I will be bringing some new material a little bit later this year about Ereshkigal and Nergal, which is Mars and Venus and their cycle. And that's a webinar that I'm privileged enough to be doing with Roman. That is that he's already done this webinar and I'm just in the process of absorbing that material. And I'm not going to share his teachings out of this webinar to my YouTube channel because that's his work. But I will bring maybe a couple of ideas to inspire you so that you can reach out to him and actually purchase the webinar from him because that's the right thing to do. And believe me, if you want to know about Venus and Venus and Mars in your life, which are two primary bodies that correspond to so many different things in our daily life, then it would be worth actually, obtaining this webinar from Ruman. You can already reach out to him if you wish. Just ask him for the webinar on Ereshkigal and Nagal, which is the cycle between Mars and Venus in the sky and what that means here on Earth and in our lives. So back to the topic of today again. Venus, as I said, disappears on the 11th of March in Melbourne, Australia, reappears on the 28th, 29th of March. The degrees of her appearance are these degrees. It will be at the second degree of Pisces, Babylonian Zodiac, and it will be at the 28th degree of Pisces in the tropical zodiac. Because I work with both systems, I'm giving you the degrees in both systems. It is up to you which you choose to look at. I recommend you look at both. That's what I do. I think it's important to do that, particularly because Babylonian astrology is the birth, the mother of astrology, and the heliacal cycles of Venus are born from those teachings, and they've just been lost over the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, so to speak. What does it mean when Venus appears at a particular degree in the zodiac? It can mean a lot of different things. It just depends where that appearance occurs relative to your birth chart. So first of all, for those of you in the southern hemisphere, you will be undergoing the descent of Inanna, that passage, that underworld passage. And from the 11th to the 28th, it is the best thing to do at that time is work on yourself. Like you can absolutely tap in and tune into the goddess Venus and everything she represents, but it is about doing the work of the heart and the soul, the work of our connection with the divine source, the work of purification and clearing and healing and letting go of things and prioritizing spirit and the divine and your embodiment of that experience during this time. That's the most important thing, because the alternate to that is to be in touch with the side of Venus that seeks lust, money, pleasures, and not that there's anything inherently wrong with any of that, because Venus exudes all those qualities and experiences. But it is said in these ancient teachings that when Venus disappears out of the sky, she is descending into the underworld. That is not a time to push forward with those sorts of things. Lust, money, sex, all that sort of stuff. Okay? It's about basically putting spirit first, if I can put it like that. And the other key point to this is to know that, so she appears at the second degree of Pisces, Babylonian zodiac. And so you can look at your Babylonian chart if you have a system that can do that for you. The Babylonian chart is not exactly the same as a sidereal chart. I just need to emphasize that. It is very, 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 very similar, but it's not exactly the same. So yeah, I don't know what programs everyone has, so I'll just have to leave that in your hands. Of course, you can reach out to me and, we could look at this together if you felt called or drawn to these teachings and you want to understand more about it for yourself. And the thing to pay attention to is whether you're looking at the tropical or Babylonian zodiac, which, as I said, I recommend you look at both. Well, that appearance of Venus at 2 degrees Babylonian, 28 degrees tropical, is that on an angle? In other words, is she appearing on the ascendant? she appearing on the midheaven, she appearing on the descendant or the IC. The other houses might bring some type of relevance, but the most powerful points are the four angles, and specifically the ascendant and midheaven. But I would say that the other 4 points are extremely powerful here as well, relative to Venus's appearance, because, Venus equates to love. So if love appears in the seventh or in the fourth or in the first or in the midheaven, that's wonderful either way. And yeah, so look, there'll be many people where Venus is not appearing on those angles, because there'll be many people that don't have either 2 degrees Babylonian or 28 degrees tropical on any of those angles. And there will be many people that do. For those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, here's the really interesting thing. Venus does not disappear. She does not descend into the underworld. This is a really interesting phenomena that occurs occasionally. And when it does occur, it literally means that Venus does not need to go through that purging process, that purification process. She's ready just to basically keep going. So where's she coming from, and where is she going to? She's coming from her evening star phase, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And I love the way Ruman frames it. He says that the evening star, which is where Venus is still in this cycle at the moment, in her evening star phase, as she moves from that to the morning star phase, he called it specifically, this is love towards the divine, eternal. Sorry, no, that's the other way around. Erase that statement and I'll start again. The evening star to the morning star is evening star is Aphrodite, morning star is Pallas Athena. And the way Ruman frames this is that this is Venus, the love goddess, towards the created world. So Venus evening star is the love goddess, and this is her finishing that cycle, completing that cycle, and bringing that love towards the created world, which is morning star Pallas Athena. So that's the transition in a nutshell, in terms of framing it in some kind of way. So for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, Venus appears actually literally at the same time she forms a conjunction. She doesn't actually disappear in the Northern Hemisphere in lots of places in USA. So you guys will see Venus as a morning star basically on the 20th of March at 4 degrees tropical Aries and at 9 degrees Babylonian Pisces. And I'll say that again. So she appears on the 20th of March, Northern Hemisphere, New York City, and many, many states and cities around that vicinity, around that kind of latitude. 4 degrees Aries tropical, 9 degrees Pisces Babylonian. So the point is that those of you in those regions, you're not going to go through that underworld passage, that purging passage, that clearing, transformative spiritual passage. Venus is ready just to keep going. She's fully equipped and armed with her journey of being an evening sun, everything that she brought into our lives, into our hearts, into our alignment. And she's ready to take that now into the created world, which is the Venus morning star, Pallas Athena. So once again, even though she doesn't disappear, and she appears at the degrees that I specified, it's still important to pay attention to where are those degrees in your chart if they are corresponding to the 4 angles in your birth chart. That's all I wanted to share. because those degrees and her appearance is extremely crucial for Venusian matters in our life for the next 9 months, starting from March, from the point of view of the Venus morning star cycle and what that speaks to for us. So there's two very distinct ways of looking at this Venus star point. There's the actual conjunction between the Sun and Venus, which is the Aries Venus star point, and I'm going to come back and speak to that separately. And then there's her heliacal cycle, which in the southern hemisphere, she actually disappears out of the sky, but in the northern hemisphere, she doesn't. And there's different implications. But if you want to know more, reach out and we can have a look at this together. Did I read my quote? No, I didn't. I would like to read this quote to you because I've noticed with this full moon, a lot of people are getting quite aggressive. Um, and I'm I mean like in astrological communities as well. I've noticed a lot of stuff and it's quite interesting. So that just got me thinking about different things this morning relative to wisdom. Uh, Look, we're all challenged, in different ways, and we all can get very reactive at different times. No one on this fucking planet can say that they're not reactive or they haven't gotten upset or pissed off or distressed. It's impossible. But for those of us that understand the sky and that have that insight and therefore have, we have the upper hand to quite a large extent because we have the knowledge and the insight of what's coming up, so we can be better prepared, you know, versus somebody who just has no clue, right? And they're just being impacted or triggered left, right, and center, and they don't understand why and what is happening. So for those of us that do have this knowledge and insight, we're very lucky. We're very lucky to have come into some sort of understanding. But wisdom, true wisdom, is bigger, than all of us put together, and all our so-called intelligence and all our so-called, you know, people think they're prophets and they're this and they're that, and they have all the answers, and no one has all the answers. Absolutely fucking no one. Anyway, here's a quote. I've just forgotten the man's name, but it's a lovely quote that, well, it's very powerful, and it corresponds to the sun god Apollo, Apollo being the god of truth and light and wisdom. One of his quotes, of course, was "Know thyself," although there is some discrepancy around that, suggesting that it belonged to somebody else. It doesn't freaking matter who it belonged to. What matters is the essence of that quote, "Know thyself." Putting that aside, here's the quote that I'd like to read to you. "How charming is divine philosophy!" Exclamation mark. "Not harsh and crabbed as dull fools suppose, but musical as is Apollo's lute," meaning his instrument, his lyre instrument, "and a perpetual feast of nectared sweets where no crude surfeit reigns." So surfeit just means an overload, basically, of things. So I'll just read that again. "How charming is divine philosophy, not harsh and crabbed as dull fools suppose, but musical as is Apollo's lute, and a perpetual feast of nectared sweets where no crude surfeit or surfeit reigns." And then I just wrote on the bottom of that, this reminded me of how ugly people's egos can be. Everyone wants to be right. And then I wrote, "Wisdom is knowing we know nothing." And then I wrote, "Know thyself." That was my reflection this morning when I observed some some people being really aggressive towards each other because they had different perspectives on something. Let's just say something. And of course, it just reminded me of how intense this full moon has been. And look, we've all been activated. Perhaps we've all been triggered, perhaps. We've all got difficult things going on. But humility, humbleness, reverence for the divine, and recognizing that in one way we don't know very much at all is probably a good place to start relative to the path of know thyself. So I'll leave it there and I'll see you guys soon. Sending you all so much love.